everyone, and welcome back. Today's video, we are doing a really easy and really fun little tissue paper painting project. And you don't need a whole lot of things for this craft. All you need is a piece of watercolor paper, some tissue paper, a white crayon, a pair of scissors, and some sort of spray bottle with water in it. So for this craft, after testing it out myself, I highly recommend you try and use dark pieces of tissue paper. So for me, for example, I'm using orange, red, and dark pink. So you can use dark blue, dark green, dark purple. I just suggest using dark colors because the darker colors show up much nicer once it's a final product. So let's go ahead and get started. On your watercolor paper with your white crayon, you are just going to draw any pattern or picture that you want. So for me, I'm just gonna go ahead and draw a few flowers. And you're not gonna be able to see, unfortunately, exactly what I'm drawing because it's a white crayon on white paper. But if you're doing this in person, you should be able to see your drawings just by looking at your paper at a different angle. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So I'm just gonna do a couple circles. And when you draw on your paper, I suggest going over the same place at least twice. It just makes it so that it just makes it stronger so that the water that you put on the tissue paper is gonna really, it's actually not gonna touch this crayon. So it just makes it much easier for the water to not go in this spot. So it doesn't cover up our pattern, if that makes sense. So I'm just gonna go ahead and draw some flowers here. Unfortunately, you cannot see what I'm drawing because it's white on white, but I'm just doing, I can show you, I'm just doing a really simple flower pattern here. I'll show you up here at the top of my page. I'm just doing a circle with some pointed leaves here. So that's the pattern that I'm doing, just really roughly to show you. But please do any pattern that you would like. I find with a craft like this, it actually looks really good with just a bunch of squiggles, a bunch of squiggly lines, because wherever you put the crayon will stay white. So that's the whole idea of this, is that whatever you have the white crayon on, it's not going to be colored with the color from the tissue paper. So it's just going to stay white, and the water and the color is going to reflect off of this white crayon. So that's why I'm going over my lines twice to make sure that no color is going to go on these lines, because it looks really cool when you have color surrounding your picture and then your pattern has stayed white. I'm just gonna draw one more flower. I'm not gonna overload this because I think the really special part to this is seeing all the nice colors. So I'm gonna leave quite a bit of white space on my paper for the color from the tissue paper. And the reason we're using watercolor is we are gonna be spraying this with water, and also once we are done, this very much will resemble a watercolor painting. Okay. So I'm done my pattern. I know you can't see that, but I can very lightly see my pattern here. So the next step to this is using your tissue paper and your scissors. You are going to cut your tissue paper into squares. So I'm just gonna show you how to do this, and then I'm gonna let you do it on your own. So I have folded my tissue paper in half just so that it's a little bit faster. So I'm just gonna cut a straight line here. And it's okay to do bigger squares. I'm just gonna cut off the end here. It's okay to do bigger squares, about that size. So I'm just gonna go ahead and keep cutting. And you need enough squares to cover your entire piece of paper. So you need quite a few squares. And again, I recommend using dark colors if possible. Okay, so they don't all need to be the same size. This is perfect. So what I'm gonna get you to do is go ahead and continue cutting out your tissue paper into these squares. Once you're done, come back and we will move on to the next step of this project. So go ahead, finish cutting your tissue paper, and then come right back. Okay everyone, so as you can see, I have a very large pile of tissue paper here in front of me. So now we are moving on to the next step of this craft here. So when I did this, I find it much easier to spray only one part of the paper at a time because it dries rather quickly. So using your spray bottle with water, you're just going to lightly spray one part of your watercolor paper. And we're going to start placing our tissue paper on top. So you can place your tissue paper in any way, any pattern you'd like. Any way you do it, it's perfectly fine, but I'm just gonna try and mix up my colors here. And I actually also will recommend that you do maybe more than one layer just to ensure you get lots of color, because with a craft like this, it is quite often times it's easier to get just a little bit of color, which still looks absolutely perfectly fine. But if you want lots of color here, I recommend doing maybe 2 layers. So I'm just going to spray gently on top of the tissue paper that I just placed. Okay, I'm just going to continue placing until all of the white is covered on this spot that I have sprayed. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do that. So just keep placing your tissue paper as we go, and it's okay to layer them. Okay, I'm gonna spray the next portion of my watercolor paper. And I'm just gonna do the same thing. I'm going to continue placing my tissue paper. Again, darker colors work better. It is completely normal to get only a little bit of color for a craft like this. So don't be alarmed if at the end of the video when we remove our tissue paper, don't be alarmed if you just have a little bit of color. That's actually totally normal, just depending on what kind of tissue paper you got, how dark your tissue paper was, what colors you used. So this is a great craft to do more than once, And that way you can experiment a little bit with different colors. Okay, so I'm getting to the end of my section here. So I'm just gonna give the next section a spray. And I'm going to continue placing. Remember, we want all of the white covered. I highly recommend you spray your watercolor paper over top of some newspaper. Don't spray directly on your counter or your floor or wherever you're doing this. Make sure you have something underneath your paper so that you're not getting water everywhere. And it's important not to completely drench your paper with water, but you don't want to spray it so lightly that your tissue paper is having a hard time sticking. So I just went ahead and sprayed another part of my watercolor paper. And I'm just going to continue layering here. And my tissue paper is sticking very nicely. This is a really neat way to get a watercolor-like texture. I'm going to spray the very last part of my paper. Hopefully you're following along with me. Okay, we're almost done here. If you need to press down slightly on your tissue paper like I am, feel free to do so. It just makes it stick a little bit better. Okay, just a couple more pieces and my first layer here is done. And one more piece there. Okay, so my paper now is completely covered. So I'm gonna go ahead and spray very lightly all over my paper. I just sprayed very, very lightly, and now I'm going to start adding an extra layer of tissue paper in certain spots. So if you'd like to do a full second layer over your entire piece of paper, feel free to do so. The more layers you do, the more color you're going to end up with, I find. My first one I did single layer, and I just got a very light pastel kind of color. It wasn't like a really, really rich, very colorful piece, which is fine. It doesn't always have to be. That's often what watercolor is it's not often very, very bright. It's often very soft. So I'm just layering up here. Feel free to use more water if you need. I'm going to do a few more pieces here where I think I need it. So yeah, if you're using really light pastel colors for this, that's perfectly okay. You're just going to end up with softer colors, which looks very nice as well. Okay, I'm just gonna add a couple more in some spaces that I think need it. Okay, one last one. Okay, so now that I've placed all of my tissue on my paper here, I'm gonna do 1, 2 tiny little sprays just to set it really nicely here. Okay, so now we just have to wait. So we are gonna wait until the tissue paper is completely dry, and then we are going to peel it off of our paper here, and then it will reveal the really nice colors that it left behind. So what I'm gonna get you to do is wait until this is completely dry, and then you're gonna come back, and then we're gonna do the last step of this project. Okay, everyone. So at this point, your tissue paper should be completely dry. And for me, my tissue paper basically fell right off of my paper. I didn't need to peel it off or anything. So I just went ahead and did that myself. So go ahead and remove your tissue paper and see what you have. So as I mentioned previously, using tissue paper as paint doesn't necessarily give you very, very dark, rich colors. And that's okay. It's not really meant to do that. It's meant to give this kind of watercolor, very light pastel effect. So I think this worked out quite nicely. But if this isn't something that you are happy with, for example, if you want darker colors, what you can do as well as another option, because the crayon doesn't absorb water in it, you can actually use your white crayon to draw your picture, and then you can just use regular watercolor paint to paint over top, and the paint will not touch your crayon. So that's another option as well, and that's something that we can look into doing next week as well for a craft, and I can give you some ideas that way. So yeah, this is what we have. We have a really nice pastel watercolor effect here using tissue paper. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I encourage you to send me some pictures of your results, and I will see you next week.